What is up, guys? I'm Potato Boy 176 and today I'm going to be playing Wargame Red Dragon for the PC. So this is going to be both a tutorial and a showcase, well, mostly a showcase, but a little bit of a tutorial, because I want to show off the game and let people who are on the fence about it really see the game in action, while at the same time trying to give you guys what few tips I can offer that I've learned either by playing the game or looking up guides or whatever. This is going to be a two-part video, because I want to talk about deck building and all that in the first part and then get to the actual battle in the second part, because both of these are very integral parts of the game, of course. But building a deck relies a lot on what you're going to do on the battle side. So honestly, if you're new to the game, you're better off just using one of the pre-made decks. Let's just say this one. This actually is a really shitty deck, it looks like. Actually, I wouldn't know. It's not bad. I mean, it would work as a starter deck, but that's a really weird deck, actually. But anyway, I would still use one of the pre-made ones, just because until you've played the game a little bit and gotten the feel for not only how it plays, but how you play with it, you're going to want to just kind of have a general use deck. You don't want anything specialized. Once you start to play the game, you start to get an idea of what works and what doesn't work for you. That's when you can start making your own decks like I have. Before we dive into deck building though, I do want to show you guys the armory. So when you go into from the main menu, go deck, you have armory and create. So create's how you make your own deck. Armory allows you to look at all the units. Now the total number of units in the game is 1,541, as seen in the upper right corner. That's 1,400 or 1,541 different units across 17 nations in 2 alliances. Now, on top of the fact that you have Blue 4 and Red 4, which is United States, their allies, Soviet Union, their allies, you also have smaller coalitions, such as the Eurocorps, which is France and Germany, Scandinavia, and so on. It goes down the line. If you click these different flags, it removes certain factions, so it allows you to kind of narrow down your search. And then, of course, you have the different categories. So logistics. Logistics is going to be basically your command units, your supplies, and your FOBs. FOB, I believe, stands for Forward Operating Base or Operations Base, but I could be wrong on that. Correct me if I am. And there's also command units, such as, say, this one, from East Germany, it looks like. And what a command unit is when we get into the battle phase, you'll see them. There's sectors on the map, and to control the sector, you have to have a command unit within the boundaries that's not moving. So for instance, here I am with my Swedish 210 point command unit, and the command unit is indicated by this little star emblem here and by the name. If this unit's sitting in that command point and, presumably not being shot at or moving around or anything, if it's just sitting there, the point will be under your control until it's contested or destroyed. That's why it's really good to hide these things. But there's also infantry-based command units. This is new to Red Dragon, and this has some pretty awesome capabilities because you can hide infantry really well in force, and they also do pretty good in buildings in terms of survivability. So you can kind of make up for, so you can basically have something better than just, say, a bus like this. You can have an actual unit that's hiding. These guys won't last 2 seconds if shots start coming at them, but the fact is that they're going to be hard to find, and that's half the battle, is finding the enemy command vehicle, or CV as they say. Then you also have resupply trucks. They do have supplies in this game, so like this thing, the Alvis Stalwart. Basically this guy will be ferrying between your FOB, where you have a huge pile of supplies, and your units on the front lines, which are going to be burning through ammo and fuel and all that. These guys, of course, don't really have any weapons, they don't really have any armor, they're basically just a supply truck. They can be captured, which is something that's kind of worth noting. Just move a unit next to them and they'll be captured. There's also helicopters that carry supplies. These are really useful because they can carry a lot of supplies, but they're really slow and big and can get shot down, so you got to be careful for that. And here's the FOB. Oh, I can't see them, but the FOB is the only structure you can actually build in the game. So that's logistics. Infantry is pretty self-explanatory. You have different categories of infantry. So this first group here with the flamethrower, these are your assault engineers, or pioneers, or whatever. They all have different names, but basically these guys have like flamethrowers and are designed to remove other infantry from buildings. You have the Milans, and yes, the faggot. That is what it's called, or Fagot, that's what it's called. These guys are your anti-tank infantry teams. These guys can hit enemy tanks at ranges that outrange the majority of those tanks. If you get a couple of them set up in a building and have them overlooking like a huge field, you've basically locked down that point, and the only way they're going to get you out of there is through napalm, assault engineers, or just a full-on rush of vehicles. In an infantry on infantry fight, it's two people, just two physical people. They're going to get their asses handed to them. That's why you need to back them up with something like this, mainline infantry. These guys aren't really anything outstanding, but they're just grunts. I mean, they're your main backbone infantry. Now, there's also, variations of that. You have somewhat more specialized infantry, then you have actual, like, commandos, and they all vary in terms of what they can do and what's best, and a lot of it just comes down to what nation or nations you're going to use. Note the fact that the stats over here on the right, most of it's pretty self-explanatory. For instance, how the range of the weapons, the accuracy, HE power versus AP power. Basically, AP power is the damage dealt to armored targets, HEs to non-armored. That's pretty self-explanatory as well. Suppression, rate of fire. I mean, most of the stuff is pretty much what it is, but it's something to look at, especially when you find yourself trying to pick between two different units. And then that's when you can pin a unit and then go find another one and then compare them side by side, which is really awesome. Support is basically your artillery and anti-air vehicles. So you're going to have your big guns here as well as rocket artillery. No, this is anti-air, sorry. But badass shit like this that will really help you get that anti-air shield over your units that you want to get. This thing, the weirdest Soviet vehicle I think I've seen in this game so far, but it's actually one of the better ones. I like the Tor. It's a really good anti-air vehicle. Tank, again, self-explanatory. This is your main battle tanks. The best tank of all of them, the Leopards. And I'm kind of joking when I say that, but these actually aren't bad tanks. For their price, Leopards are pretty good. They're one of the better tanks I've found in this game. Leopards and Challengers, and then of course the Abrams is pretty good too. Of course, the thing is you have to pay for them. Obviously, unit price is up here in the upper left corner. It's 120 for this Abrams, for instance. And so you got to kind of, when you're making a deck, it's sometimes good to think that over, cost versus the effectiveness of the unit. Is it worth paying that extra money for the unit? And when we get to the deck building, which I'll go to here in just a second, we'll see that sometimes the more expensive means you get less of them. So you have to really plan it out and be kind of thinking about a lot of different things, because otherwise you'll end up with like two actual tanks, and that doesn't get you anywhere. Recon is one of the most important sections in the game. I can't stress this enough. This is something that I've learned. If you have units that are giving you eyes, you're good. For a League analogy, you have to ward the jungle, otherwise Rengar is going to come and eat your butthole. Well, in this game, the same concept applies. If you don't have these guys hanging out in the forest, or these guys driving along with your units, or these guys flying over them, then a Soviet Rengar is going to come out and destroy you and tear you a new asshole. Vehicles. Vehicles basically your miscellaneous tab. A lot of useless vehicles in here like this. Like, I don't really see the use of this thing. It's basically a transport without the infantry. But within the vehicle tab, you will find this thing, as well as some of these things, though, like the tow launchers, rocket launchers, things that are actually fairly useful. They're not very armored, but these guys have really long range launchers, and they can be really helpful as a supporting role to an armored column. Stick these guys at the back of your main battle tank line, and they can pick off a few of the enemy units and probably draw some fire, but that might not be the worst thing in the world. Helicopter is pretty straightforward. You got Cobras, Apaches, that old thing, Little Bird. Air, again, pretty self-explanatory. The greatest plane ever made, the A-10 right here. I'm actually halfway serious, though. I really love the A-10, both in this game and in the real world, but I'm not very good with air units in this game. It's not that the mechanics are hard, it's trying to keep your air units alive that I struggle with. It's a lot harder than you might think. But there's a whole plethora of air units, and it's one of those things where it's difficult, the air battle part of the game, but it is if you can use it right, you can dominate everything. It's just a matter of using it right. Finally is the new addition to this game, which is the naval section. So the navy section in this game includes infantry that are coming in either on amphibious vehicles or going to be on like a boat, basically. So all the vehicles, all the infantry you see here are going to be amphibious based. We're going to be coming off of ships that are amphibious. Anyway, this is where you would get your naval units, your boats, and all that shit. I don't do Navy. I have some ships and I'll use them to give my guys close ground support, but I'm just not. I just don't. I don't know. It just doesn't work for me. Um, Navies are really a pain in the ass on both sides. I mean, when you have them on your side, it's great. It's really hard to get rid of a navy without another navy, it seems, and that's about as much as I know of naval strategies. I really can't help out much more than that, unfortunately. But that's a pretty cool weapon. But yeah, so that's all the different categories that you're going to encounter in the game. Logistics, infantry support, tank, recon, vehicle, helicopter, air, and navy. And with all that in mind, now let's start talking about creating a deck. I'm going to just breeze through this real quick. I don't want to waste your time. And when you hit create a deck, you can give the deck a name. I'm not going to make one, but you could give it Blaudon's Finest, if I could spell. Vlaudon, whatever. You know what? Screw it. I'm not going to make this deck, so I don't even care. But then you pick faction, blue 4 or red 4. Well, I usually play blue 4, so I'll leave it at that. Then next comes one of the bigger questions. Now this is where the armory comes into the picture. You can choose to have a national or coalition deck. You don't have to. You can have access to all the units available from all the factions of Blue 4 or Red 4. But there are bonuses to choosing a specific nation or coalition. There's also drawbacks. So that's, again, where the armory comes in. You can kind of look through and decide, okay, I want, I want anti-tank infantry teams like the Milans, the Faggots, and you find out that West Germany has a good one because West Germany's awesome. Well, then, so you pick West Germany, you get prototype units, which can be a mixed bag. You get additional activation points and more availability, but you're restrained to that nation. And that can be a serious problem. For instance, I can tell you that the West German Air Force and their helicopters are balls. They suck. I'm just going to come right out and say it. They're balls. Don't rely on them as your main source. So, like, making an air-based German deck is probably not the best idea in the world. But making a mechanized or armored group with the Germans is actually a really smart idea. So that brings me to type. So type you can do all, which has no bonus, but also no problem. Or you can pick something more specific. So let's just say I want to do armored. Well, if I click armored, then I get additional experience for units of type tank. Tanks cost less activation points and plus 4 slots available for tanks. However, you're restrained to selected type of units. One of the things that I failed to mention, when you're looking at the unit card of a unit, in the lower part of the screen where you'd find fuel and all that, you'll find something along the vein, I think they call it type, honestly. And in that section, you'll see listed for different units, it might say motorized, mechanized, navy, whatever. That means that that unit classifies as that type, whatever it might be. So what that means here with the restrained to selected type of units is that only units with the armored tag under their type section are going to appear. This can be a hindrance, especially if you pick like mechanized, because then you lose most of your main battle tanks. So it's trade-offs. Again, trade-offs. And it just comes to what do you like to do, what works for you. Finally is the era. This is just before 1985, before 1980. All that I really know is that it helps with the number of activation points, but obviously you don't get the newest stuff, which can be a mixed bag again. Now, I'm going to take you guys into the deck I'll be using today. I called it Soraka's Nanners because I couldn't think of anything else. It's a British deck, and here it is. So this is a armored deck, and you can tell in part because of all the armor units I have, but because I used the armored deck, I got the 4 additional slots that I wouldn't have had with these other ones. So you can see they all end here except the armored deck. So let's talk about activation points real quick. Let me go here, I guess. So in the upper right corner, when you go into, you obviously have the tabs again. So logistics, infantry support, blah blah blah. We're under vehicle right now. When you go up to activation points, you'll see 58 to 60 here. Well, that's what that whole activation points are used to add units to your deck. So for instance, right now I'm looking at the vehicle thing and it has cost 1, cost 2, 2, 2, 3. So the way it works is that if I want to put a unit in this first one, that's going to cost me 1 activation point. If I want to put a unit in the second one, that's going to cost me 2, which is why I can't do that. I only have 1 left, which sucks. I don't know where to put it. The point is, though, that's where the activation point bonuses come in, because you can make a deck that would have like 70 activation points. You could have a lot of units. the catch is that in order to get all those activation points, you have to sacrifice certain things, and you might be sacrificing good quality units. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can definitely make do with numbers. Numbers can have an advantage, but you have to make sure it's the right numbers, if that makes any sense. You have to make sure it's the right units for it. Otherwise, you're just spamming T-34s and probably not going to get very far. But while we're here, let's take a quick look. So this is the FV-102 Striker. What this thing is basically a really funny looking treaded vehicle with rockets on it. It sounds badass, but I can assure you it's not. It has 2 armor, which is nothing. Most main battle tanks have at least 10, and that's kind of on the shittier spectrum. I know, here, for comparison, the Challenger 2, which is like the best tank that the British can field, has 23 front armor, 11 side, 6 and 4 back and top. So back to the FV-102 Striker. It has 1 weapon, and that's the swing fire. This is a high explosive anti-tank, as indicated by heat. It's guided, which means that it has to stay stationary to hit the target. If it shoots and then you give it a move order, it will move, but that rocket's just going to whiz off into nowhere. M-Class it's just the caliber, I guess. It has 10 of them, though. That's what the times 10 here is. Range, it has 2,625 meters of range, which is really awesome. Again, for comparison, the Challenger 2, which has one of the better, not necessarily better cannons, but one of the longer range ones, is only 2275. So this vehicle can outrange them by a whopping like 100 and... geez, I'm not good at math off the top of my head. I'm going to say 150 meters, but I'm probably wrong. The accuracy, though, is 45%. That's not that good. What's the point of being able to shoot, what is that, 2.6 kilometers, and if you can't hit shit? That is where veterancy comes in. When you're looking at a unit, next to the search bar here, you can get different veterancy levels. So the higher the veterancy, the better certain perks will be. So if you can just hold your cursor over the train, I don't know what you want to call it, the veterancy status, you'll see what it does. So trained is +8 accuracy, hardened is +16, and there's other differences too. Most of your frontline units, you want to go with more veterancy, but there is something to be said about maybe not. Because look at it this way. Here's my Challenger 1 Mark III. I could have 4 if I go with veteran, or I could have 2 if I go with elite. I'm going to go with 4. And the reason being is that I want physical tanks on the field too. Just as much as I want good tanks, I actually want physical tanks. What good is it to me if I can field 3 really good tanks, but there's only 3 of them? You can't, I mean, there is something to be said about numbers. Some of your tanks you're going to want fewer of them with higher veterancy, but sometimes it's not a bad idea to have a tank that just isn't so good, and that's basically designed to just fill in your ranks between your more elite tanks. So that's deck building. Pretty much everything I can give you there. Well, at the end of the day, make a deck, make it look good, get the units you want, then put it into the field, and play it and see what happens. That's the best you can do. Pay attention to what happens, pay attention to your defeats, and one last thing I'm going to show you before we dive into the battle. If you go under Profile from the main menu, you can go to Replays. And this is really good because replays can be really helpful in understanding certain things that you may have done good or wrong. That can help you get a little bit better and have a better head on your shoulders in terms of this game's strategy. So definitely take advantage of the replays. So, yeah. But that's all I want to talk about deck building now. We're going to move on to the actual battle phase.